Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Today we are looking at the single most exhausting aspect of the human experience. I'm talking about that crushing, suffocating weight of trying to be the CEO, the general manager, and, the chief security officer of your own life. We're diving into the tension between that desperate need to control everything versus the radical and, frankly, terrifying theological proposition of total surrender.
It really is the ultimate clash of worldviews,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
On one side, you have the modern idea that says you are alone, so you better fix it.
Yeah.
And on the other, you have the source material we're looking at, which argues your anxiety is actually a case of mistaken identity.
Exactly. We are diving into a lecture from above inspiration. And what's so fascinating here is that it treats worry not just as a bad mood or like a chemical thing in the brain,
Okay.
but as a spiritual symptom. It argues that the anxiety keeping you awake at 3 in the morning is actually a negative expression of faith.
A negative expression. So it frames the whole discussion as this binary choice. You're either functioning as an atheist, where you are the highest power and therefore responsible for everything,
Right, it's all on you.
or you're functioning as a believer, where a deity is actually supposed to be doing the heavy lifting. The source basically suggests that humans simply aren't designed to handle the speed of life without that divine infrastructure.
It's a heavy topic, but I think it's one we all really need to hear. And actually, before we get into the gears of this, I have a quick favor to ask.
Yeah.
If you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. It really helps us keep these deep dives coming. Okay, so let's set the stage. The source material opens with a pretty brutal assessment of the modern human. It says we are twisted, tied up, and melting down.
Which is a description that I think fits most of us by, what, Friday afternoon?
Or Monday morning for me.
True. But the diagnosis is where the source immediately gets interesting. It defines worry as the anticipation of the negative.
The anticipation of the negative. I just want to pause on that because it's so precise. It implies that worry is actually a creative act.
It is. It's a misuse of your imagination. You are literally using your creative faculties to build a future that hasn't happened yet. And usually it's a future where everything goes completely wrong. You're writing a tragedy in your head and then emotionally reacting to it as if it's already happened.
And this leads to that central, almost mathematical argument the source presents. It posits an inverse relationship between faith and worry, like a seesaw.
Exactly. The argument is, yeah, it's mathematical. As faith goes up, worry has to go down.
Right.
As worry flourishes, faith diminishes. The source argues they just cannot occupy the same space at the same time. It's a zero-sum game.
You can't be fully trusting and fully worrying simultaneously.
You can't.
That's a tough concept, though, because we usually think of worry as this passive thing that just happens to us, like catching a cold. But the source is framing it as an active displacement of faith. It even quotes Matthew 6, the classic line where Jesus asks, "Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to his life?"
Right. And usually we hear that as just, a comforting phrase like, hey, relax, worry doesn't help. But this source digs so much deeper. It argues that worry is effectively an insult to the divine.
An insult.
Yes. Because if you claim to believe in an all-powerful God, but you are consumed by worry, you are functionally living as an atheist. You're saying, I don't think God can handle this.
Or I don't think God is paying attention.
Exactly. The source calls worry a negative expression of faith.
Oh,
You have more faith that the disaster is coming than faith that the solution is coming.
that is a fascinating way to put it. Functional atheism. You might check the believer box on a form, but your anxiety is proof you think you're completely alone in the universe.
Precisely. And that leads to the source's specific diagnosis for why we feel this way. It calls it the orphan spirit.
This was the part of the lecture that really stopped me in my tracks, the orphan spirit.
Yeah.
Let's unpack this metaphor because it carries so much weight.
It's really the core of the source's psychological profile of us. If you think about an orphan, in the most literal sense, they are without a protector. They are responsible for their own survival.
Right.
If they don't hunt, they don't eat. If they don't fight, they get hurt. They are the sole guarantor of their own existence.
It's ultimate self-reliance, but it's not out of ego, it's out of necessity. It's just survival mode.
Exactly. And the source argues that the root of all our fear, all our worry, and our anxiety is living with this orphan spirit. It's operating under the assumption that, at the end of the day, there's no one above you to catch you. It's a very secular, materialist view of the world, that we are just biological entities scrapping for resources in a totally indifferent universe.
But the theological counterpoint, and this is really the mission of our deep dive here, is that the source claims this is all a lie. It argues you have a heavenly father.
That's the clash. The source is arguing. If you have a father who is the best father in the universe, but you are stressing out like an orphan, there is a fundamental disconnect in your identity. You're living in a reality that doesn't actually exist. You're acting like the CEO when you're really the child.
So anxiety isn't just a mental health struggle in this view, it's an identity crisis. You've forgotten who you are and, maybe more importantly, whose you are.
Correct. And because we forget that, we try to keep up with what the source calls the speed of life.
Oh, that phrase, the speed of life. It sounds exhausting just saying it.
It describes the modern condition perfectly, though. That endless need to make adjustments, plan for the future, power through problems, fix the car, pay the mortgage, navigate the relationship. The source says we're trying to change things we've already failed to change a million times before.
And we're doing it with, what, limited hardware?
That's the engineering argument. The source says you are not designed to be able to take on everything. It's all about load-bearing capacity. Think of a bridge. If a bridge is rated for 10 tons and you drive a 100-ton train over it, what happens?
It collapses.
It collapses. Not because the bridge is bad, but because the load exceeded the design.
So our anxiety is basically structural failure.
It's a system overload. When you try to play God, when you try to know the future, control outcomes, manage everyone's perception of you, you're trying to run a universe-level simulation on a human-level processor. You just inevitably melt down because you don't have the RAM for it.
I love that analogy. It's like trying to run the newest high-end video game on a calculator from 1995. It's just going to smoke and die.
That's exactly it. And this is where the source brings in the theological counterargument.
Or,
If human capacity is the pocket calculator, divine capacity is the supercomputer. The force argues that God sees the future, he understands every angle, he knows how other people perceive the situation, all these variables we can never possibly know.
and that's a crucial point. We worry so much about what others are thinking, but we're just guessing. The source implies God actually have the data.
Right. And because God has this omniscient perspective, the source claims he has the best solution. But, and here's where the rubber meets the road, the source is very honest that God's best solution might not be the path you chose for yourself.
And that's the rub, isn't it? That's why we cling to that orphan spirit. We trust our own plan, even if it's flawed, more than some divine plan we can't see. We want the problem solved our way.
We do. We want God to just sign off on our paperwork. But the source points to Philippians 4, suggesting we replace anxiety with prayer and petition. Then 1 Peter 5.7, casting all cares on him. It's not just venting, it's a transfer of responsibility.
Yeah.
You're handing the entire case file over to a manager who actually knows the law.
So let's get practical here, because surrender is a beautiful word. It looks great on a bumper sticker. But in the middle of a crisis, when the speed of life is crushing you, how do you actually do it? Does the source give us a mechanism?
It does. And it's refreshingly simple. I think a lot of people, even skeptics, view prayer as this formal, high-pressure speech. But the source explicitly says prayer does not need to be eloquent. It doesn't need to be long. It doesn't need to be poetry.
Thank goodness.
The source quotes a simple prayer, God help please. That's it. It's just an admission of insufficiency. It's saying, I am an orphan right now and I need a father.
There was also this pragmatic, almost ironic method mentioned, the worn out method.
Yes. The source says effectively, go ahead, try it your way. Try to fix it. Do it until you are worn out enough to finally surrender. It's an acknowledgement of our own stubbornness. Sometimes we have to hit the wall of our own limitations before we're willing to hand over the keys.
It's the idea that we treat God as a last resort, but he's willing to wait until we get there. The source also talks about an exchange, a trade deal. You give God the brokenness, the failures, the problems, all the stuff you don't want, and in return, he provides peace.
And this is key. It's not logical peace. The source mentions the peace that transcends all understanding. Logical peace is when your bank account is full and your health is perfect. That's easy. Transcendent peace is being calm when the house is on fire because you know the fire chief is already on the scene.
That connects to the emotional roller coaster metaphor. The source talks about going to bed thinking about a problem, waking up thinking about it, letting it just capture your entire day.
We've all been there. It's that obsessive looping. The brain trying to solve a puzzle it just doesn't have all the pieces for.
And the source claims God says, I'll take care of that. I'll take your emotion and your thinking. It's an offer to offload the mental processing power that is draining your battery.
And to replace that processing power, the source uses a really interesting structure, the 4 Ps. This is the infrastructure that replaces the orphan spirit.
I loved this breakdown. Let's walk through these because they really paint a picture of what this father figure is supposed to actually do.
Sure. So the first one is provider. That's the basics. Needs met. The orphan worries about food. The child just shows up to the dinner table.
Okay.
The second is protector. That's safety. It's guarding your heart and mind from that crushing fear.
Right.
The third is promoter.
That one stood out to me. Promoter, it sounds almost corporate, like a boxing promoter or a career sponsor.
It is unique.
Mm.
But in this theological context, it implies that God isn't just maintaining your status quo. A promoter actively works to advance you, to move you into new seasons, to elevate you. It challenges the idea of a passive God. It suggests God is ambitious for you.
Which is a huge shift from the orphan view where you have to claw your way up every single rung of the ladder yourself. And the fourth,
The fourth is professor.
the professor.
Yes, to reveal beautiful new things.
Yeah.
It implies that the relationship isn't just about crisis management, it's about learning. It paints God as a total infrastructure for your life. You don't need to be your own provider, protector, promoter, or teacher. You just need to be the student.
This really reinforces that binary we talked about at the start. If you have a provider, protector, promoter, and professor, you don't need to worry. But if you don't believe you have those things, if you're in that secular orphan mindset, then worry is actually the only logical response.
That's a brilliant insight. If you are truly alone in the universe, then worry is rational. You should be worried because it is all on you. But if the source is right, and there is a God who fills those roles, then worry becomes completely irrational.
Which leads us to maybe the most controversial claim in the source material, the implication of control. The source says, worry is a choice and trust is a choice. You can't do both.
That is a hard pill to swallow. It suggests that worry is not something that happens to us, but something we allow. The source calls it an incrusion. It says worry is common, but not normal.
Common, but not normal. That's a sticky phrase.
Think of it like a cavity. Tooth decay is common, but it's not normal. It's a sign of disease. The source argues that while everyone worries, it's actually a spiritual malfunction. It challenges the cultural idea that being stressed out is just part of being a responsible adult.
It goes further, doesn't it? The source argues that worry robs you.
Yes, it robs you of the ability to worship, and more tangibly, it robs you of the ability to love the people around you.
Because you're distracted.
Exactly. If I am mentally obsessing over tomorrow's meeting, trying to be the God of that meeting in my head, I am not present with my family today. I am physically there, but spiritually and mentally, I am completely absent. The source calls worry an enemy for that reason. It just steals the present moment.
And the source also addresses the pushback.
Yeah.
You know, the feeling that if we don't worry, we are being irresponsible, or that God's commands to do not worry are just restrictive rules.
Right. The source argues that when Jesus says do not, he isn't being meddlesome. He's not a killjoy. He has our best interests at heart. It's like a parent telling a child not to touch a hot stove. It's not a rule to limit the child's freedom. It's a rule to prevent the child from getting burned. The source says we are twisted and tied up because we tolerate something worry that is fundamentally destructive to us.
So it returns to that binary worldview. You are either carrying the weight or God is. There is no middle ground where you carry half and God carries half.
No. The source is very clear on that. It says God wants to take the full weight. Not just the difficult parts, but the sin, the brokenness, the failures, the future. The quote is, "Give it to me because I can handle it," and the truth is only I can handle it.
Only I can handle it. That brings us right back to that engineering limit.
It does. It suggests that the human operating system is just not built to run the universe simulation. We crash when we try. The source's argument is that peace is found not in solving the problem, not in fixing the glitch, but in resting in the nature of the programmer, resting in who God is.
It's a shift from problem-focused coping to person-focused trust.
That's a great way to put it. The source emphasizes that God is everything I need and everything I long for. It's an invitation to a relationship, not just a transaction for stress relief. He enjoys the ride. He wants the relationship. And worry is essentially just ignoring that relationship to stare at the problem.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we're left with a pretty radical proposition. The source material argues that we are walking around carrying these backpacks full of lead bricks, worries about money, health, status, the future, and we are buckling under the weight because we think we have to.
And we are buckling because we are trying to do a job that isn't ours. That's the synthesis here. The source argues that God isn't just offering to help you carry the backpack. He's saying that backpack isn't yours. Put it down.
It's such a powerful image. The idea that God acts as the provider, protector, promoter, and professor means we have permission to resign from the position of general manager of the universe.
Which, if we're honest, is a position we are all doing a terrible job at anyway. It should come as a relief.
It really should. So here's the thought we want to leave you with today. It's a question to just let simmer in the back of your mind. If the source is correct, if we are truly not designed to carry the weight of our own lives, and if our anxiety is actually a dashboard warning light telling us we are trying to do God's job, then the question isn't, how do I solve this problem?
No. The question becomes, why am I still holding it?
Why am I still holding it? That is something to think about. Thank you for listening to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. We hope this deep dive gave you a new perspective on the weight you're carrying.
Until next time.
Take care.